Aw, yeah. Welcome back to another episode of Drafts with Jordan and Josh. I am one of your co-hosts, Jordan Plocker, at PFF_Jordan. And with me, as always, is at PFF_Josh, Mr. Josh Liskowitz. How are you doing, Josh?
I'm doing really well. How are you, Jordan?
I am doing outstanding, Josh. I'm having a lot of fun doing this show with you. Really thrilled with the responses we've been getting. We've been getting responsive feedback on Twitter, on iTunes. I've been getting text messages from people. So again, really, really excited about the feedback. You guys are loving the show. Thank you. Please, tell others. Please leave us a nice 5-star rating and a nice review. Speaking of reviews, Josh, we have a really, really cool contest going on where a listener can receive like a really cool subscription to our stats. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, this week on the podcast, we'll again be giving away a subscription to our brand new PFF Elite package. This includes access to our signature stats, award-winning fantasy football analysis and tools, much, much more. That subscription's worth $200, so this is pretty cool. All you have to do to enter to win is leave a review in iTunes and be sure to include your email address or your Twitter handle. Last week, we ran the same promotion, and we have our first winner. It is at Greg_Noonan. Looks like he put his Twitter handle in there. So, Greg Noonan, congratulations. You have won PFF Elite. And anyone else, you are eligible this week, so have at it. If you're going to profootballfocus.com/covfef. Oh, I got the end of that wrong. profootballfocus.com/subscriptions. That's where you can find all the info. That's where you can get onto iTunes, leave that review, and again, leave that 5-star review. That helps us out, and hopefully you'll be the big winner next week
and
to win that PFF Elite package.
Congratulations to Greg Noonan. That's an awesome thing to win. I imagine he's probably going to be like dominating his fantasy league now. And if you know Greg Noonan or are involved in a league with at Greg_Noonan, watch out. But thanks, Greg. We appreciate it, buddy, and looking forward to you having fun with that and getting back to us about all the things you learn on there. All right, yeah, Josh. Yeah, so we call the show Drafts because we talk about multiple drafts, and we've been talking about 2018 to start off all these shows, and the quarterbacks, most importantly. Episode 1, we started off with Sam Darnold and Josh Rosen, and then in episode 2, we examined Baker Mayfield and Mason Rudolph. Both of those shows are available on iTunes if you want to go ahead and check those out. Today we're going to talk about Lamar Jackson from Louisville and Josh Allen from Wyoming, two of the more exciting and athletic, intriguing prospects in this draft class. Again, when we talk about these quarterbacks, we say they still have the full season to improve and change their narratives. So, when we talk about some things that we'd like to see them improve on, that's what we're mentioning. But let's go ahead and start off with Josh Allen. Josh, first thing that jumps out right now is he's got a terrible first name.
That was not something that jumped out to me, Jordan.
Oh, okay. And then, second, when you watch this kid on tape, there's a lot to like about him. Ideal size. You saw some snaps from him under center, operating it looks like a sort of a pro style offense, or what we were used to refer to as a pro style offense. Throwing the ball down the field. A lot to like about him, Josh. What did you like about Josh Allen?
Yeah, at least statistically, one of the things that stands out is that he has. He had the highest percentage of air yards in the nation last year, as 72% of his yards coming through the air. Now, that means a couple things. One, it could certainly mean that his guys aren't getting it done after the catch, that they're not manufacturing a lot of yards after the catch for him. That could certainly be part of it. But it also more than likely means that when you look at, by comparison to other quarterbacks in the country, he's working all parts of the field, especially intermediate and downfield a little bit more. So I like seeing that. I like seeing him working under center as well. He's not going to have as much developmental time working on his footwork as you normally do, as you see was an issue with our number 1 overall pick from last year, Jared Goff, going to L.A. So at least baseline, you like that stuff right away.
Yeah, he's, I noticed again, that size really factored in the pocket. he was able to like sort of shed rushers at times or evade rushers with his foot quickness. I mean, they even called design runs for him. So he's got, definitely he's got a good foot athlete with good size. Liked all that stuff. Really liked him too when he throw on the move. We mentioned he'd operate under center sometimes, and sometimes he would do those play action passes where he turns his back to the defense and then goes out there on the rollout, and really liked the way that he threw on the move there, and like some of those Shanahan plays as we called them when we see them, because he really has a skill set that kind of would fit what they like to do, don't you think, Josh?
Yeah, I think so. The play action, that's really key. That's something we talked about when we reviewed San Francisco's draft strategy and how they're really focused on finding quarterbacks that can play well in play action. And certainly I think Allen will fall under that when he is evaluated for next year's draft. Again, accuracy on the move, that was something I was also impressed with. Now, switching gears into things that need to improve, I think accuracy in the pocket, that's a bit of an issue. Now, part of that is his mechanics. He seems to throw everything with the top half of his body, doesn't use his legs properly, doesn't get enough rotation and torque with his legs. That could be an issue that impacts his accuracy. And that's something that he's really going to have to work on going forward, especially this year as he tries to not only improve himself for Wyoming's sake, but certainly improve his stock for the draft next year.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at these, we've been examining all these stats for all these top quarterbacks, and a lot of their accuracy, adjusted completion percentages are pretty high, and Allen's really isn't. His ended up being 67.0 adjusted completion percentage, which only ranks 45th among all returning FBS quarterbacks. So, like you said, I mean, that accuracy from the pocket is something that we're definitely going to need to see him improve upon. And like you said, I mean, some of it, could be, mechanical, like you said, with, kind of sinking the top half and the lower half of his body. But there's also some decision-making issues too, don't you think?
Yeah, that's definitely an issue. Real quick, you brought up an interesting point, or at least something that gets my head moving. Something that needs to be brought up with the adjusted completion percentage. That percentage that you quoted, that's not broken down by area of the field. Again, going back to the fact that he was the highest in the country in yards in the air, that means that he's attempting more passes intermediate and downfield. So naturally, he's probably going to have a lower completion percentage, even adjusted, which takes into account drops, throwaways, things of that nature as well. But I think by nature, he's going to be a little bit less or have not quite as high of a completion percentage as far as that goes. But yeah, decision making, he had one of the highest ratios of turnover-worthy throws in the country. Just there are times when he just unloads it and doesn't have any real regard for the defensive coverage, doesn't read it, or just thinks he can beat the coverage with his arm. And that's not working at Wyoming. That's certainly not going to work at the next level. That's something he needs to fix immediately.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point too about like his adjusted completion percentage. It probably is always going to be a little bit lower than some of these top quarterbacks in this draft, just because of the depth of his targets. Because he is pushing the ball further down the field, like we alluded to that in the beginning of discussing him. So, anyways, yeah, I mean, like in conclusion on him again, big, strong kid, athletic. Again, plenty of tape of him operating under center, throws well on the move. We just have some concerns about some of the accuracy and decision-making within the pocket. But again, very exciting player to watch. Not that you'll be able to see a lot of Wyoming games on TV, but if you do get a chance, definitely check out Josh Allen. And then now we'll head to our next quarterback here, who probably doesn't really need much of an introduction, that being Lamar Jackson from Louisville. Josh, what really stood out to you about Lamar Jackson?
Well, let's talk about some of the good things. First off, looking at stats, he had a QB rating of 114.8 when in a clean pocket, and I think that's very critical. That's number 7 among returning QBs, so that's up there pretty high. Not just of the class we consider for the draft or the top guys. That's of the entire country, so that's excellent. Obviously, he's an elite athlete. When have we seen a runner like this since Michael Vick? Elusiveness, he sets up moves in the open field. It's not just an extra piece of the puzzle with him like it is with most quarterbacks. It's something that has to be utilized because he's so dangerous when running.
Yeah, he's. I mean, just like you said, it's almost like a video game. It's Mike Vick-esque. It looks like that like almost like high school football at times. The one guy who's faster than everybody else. I mean, it just looks unfair. And then that like you said, that sort of has to be used just because it is such a rare ability. But there is also like something, there's a lot to like about his ability and technique as a passer too. I really liked, he's got sort of a quick trigger on his release. Thought he can really get rid of the ball, quickly. And, like you mentioned, when he's not under pressure, he's got a pretty good QB rating. So there is some things to like about him as a passer. Although at this point, his biggest impact has probably been made with his legs. Don't you think?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. He's got an arm. Again, that quick trigger combined with that's excellent. I like the fact that he can also throw a touch on some of those deep passes where he's trying to drop the ball in or those fade passes. He's not a guy that's just trying to gun it to every single part of the field. You look at games like the Duke game, I remember in particular, where they were able to really contain and bottle him in there. And then when they took the primary throwing option out and he didn't have a lane to run, that created major problems for him where he just lacked anticipation on his throws. He took a lot of unnecessary hits and just really, really struggled to go through progressions as a passer in an effective time manner within the context of that offense.
Yeah, one of the things that, always concerns me with quarterbacks who have his type of running ability or just, running ability of that sort of caliber, not exactly of that level, but just, a decent amount of running ability is that they always, it always ends up into be like a crutch for them, like that's how they get out of tough third down situations and things like that. It's, well, instead of having to stay in the pocket and make a throw, they have the ability to get out and pick up that first down with their legs. And so again, that sort of shapes their game, and shapes their decision making and their thought process. And you see that with him, like you said, it's he has a tendency to sort of run too many times instead of maybe throwing a ball to an open man. We talk about these hits, and he's not a big kid. I don't know how how many of these hits he's going to be able to take. That's
another piece of the comparison to Vic, because Vic obviously wasn't very big, had problems with injuries throughout his career. That's certainly a concern as well.
Yeah, so there's, and I think you also, like when we examined his deep pass, there was some issues with him throwing to his left as well, wasn't there?
To his left was absolutely abysmal. Completed 2 of 17 for 1 touchdown, 4 interceptions, and a passer rating of 19.6. Now, when you're a quarterback like him that has his scrambling ability, that has to be one of your biggest weapons. You have to be able to throw the ball downfield because ultimately you're going to be getting the coverage, the defense in all sorts of terrible situations. And because of his inaccuracy, his lack of anticipation, his inability to reset when he's on the run, poor weight transfer, and he's inaccurate, I think that really limits his production. And I think that's partially what led to really his lower production toward the end of the year, in particular in terms of his passing, because I think teams kind of figured that out. They figured, well, if we can take away the early stuff, the intermediate, the underneath, play tight with that, and then hit those, stay in those contained lanes to keep the rushing away. We took a look at his grades the last 5 games in terms of his passing, Jordan, and they weren't very pretty, were they?
No, I mean, they definitely started last couple of games, I mean, they were not really that good. I mean, like week 10, his passing grade was 58.6. Week 11, it was 57.6. Week 12, 59.5. Week 13, 65.2, and then the bowl game against LSU was down to 46.1. So, again, like he's a guy who's got a ton of athletic gifts, and he's got an arm that with a quick release, he can throw, with touch. There's a lot to like about him. We'd really like to see him take a big step forward as a pocket passer this season. It'll be his 3rd as a starter. Like to see him be a bit more consistent with his lower body mechanics. And again, and just keep developing as a pocket passer, who can comfortably progress to his 2nd or 3rd read while in the pocket. And if we can see that sort of thing, that'll be a tremendous improvement for him this year. But again, a lot to like about that player. All right, Josh, we're just sort of like, as we talk about one more guy here for the 2018 class before we move on, I want to talk about My guy, Josh. I have a my guy this week. Last week you had Derwin James, who was awesome. Fun guy to talk about and watch. This week my guy is Philip Lindsay, the running back from Colorado. So he's very small. He's only about 5'7" and 190 pounds, but he plays mean. I used to say that, the great wide receiver Steve Smith, who recently retired, used to lead the NFL in anger per square inch. And that's how Philip Lindsay plays to me. I mean, he's just incredibly intense, physical, mean, fun to watch play. He catches the ball well out of the backfield. He only has one career drop. He can make people miss in the open field. He's a vocal leader. There's a lot to like about him, even though he's really, really small. He forced 52 missed tackles as a runner and then forced another 18 as a receiver. So I know he's not big, Josh, but I think that he could carve out a role in the NFL. And I would definitely, take him with a late round pick. What do you think?
Yeah, and this is something I'll hammer home throughout the podcast, and people are going to get sick of hearing me if they haven't paid attention to me on Twitter before, and have already heard me say it constantly. But if you are a running back that's not going in the first round, in order to get on the field, you have to be able to play on third down and special teams. And when you have that type of mentality that Philip Lindsay does, I really don't care about the size. He's going to be able to carve out some kind of niche on special teams. I have no doubts about that. But you mentioned everything he brings to you as a receiver, the elusiveness in the open field, only one career drop. I think there's just such an extra element that he brings to that. And then you look at teams like Detroit that feature basically receiving only option at running back. That's a real thing in the NFL. It's not even the blocking that's as important on third down anymore. So ultimately, yes, I think he's probably worth a draft pick as well, because there are a lot of different ways to use him, even if you're not having him run between the tackles every first and second down.
Yeah, I mean, his yards after the catch was really impressive. And then again, just from seeing him in the locker room, I mean, again, he's a vocal leader. He's a guy that guys rally around. Like I said, just tough. I mean, I remember I was doing some analysis on, a second run analysis on the Colorado Stanford game from last year, Josh. And in our analysis pane, it shows that there's a penalty, and I see a penalty on there for Philip Lindsay for illegal use of the hands. And I'm thinking to myself, why would Philip Lindsay get an illegal use of the hands penalty? And so I watched the play. And before I watched the play, I was like, I bet he picked the biggest, baddest defensive player on Stanford and punched him in the face. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened when I watched the play. He had punched Solomon Thomas's helmet right off his head and sort of set the tone in the second half for CU's win over Stanford. So again, I just really like the kid. He's probably my favorite player to watch in college football. Even though he's not necessarily a first round guy, but I definitely think he has value in the draft. Moving on now, we're going to go to the 2017 draft. We're going to go back and we're going to go inside some war rooms and just sort of take you, when we go inside the war room, we're just sort of examining what went into the team's pick. Why did they, choose this player? Is a certain philosophy? Why did they like something about him? So we just think there's a lot to be learned about this. So Josh, do you want to start us off with taking us inside the Seattle Seahawks war room?
Sure. Let's get started with this. First off, Pete Carroll emphasized competition. Everything begins with competition.
Oh, yeah.
This isn't really new. This isn't a surprise. But I think what is interesting is that they kind of talked about how rookies are viewed as competition enhancement to bring out the best of the rest of the roster. It's not just about a rookie coming in and being the better player. It's about lighting that fire under the rest of that roster, getting them to play up to the optimal ability that they have as well. And I think that's a very interesting thing. Also, general points they talked about, draft and develop as a key philosophy. And they're really in a position to be able to do that in terms of develop. You see guys, especially on defense, they'll rotate quite a bit. They'll put guys in singular situations similar to how New England does it, where they're not asking a guy to do too much. They're asking him to really exploit his strengths. We've talked long about Spark. Those scores that rely heavily on length and explosive athleticism, that's always an issue with them. And it just seems like they have a clear willingness to draft athletes they feel that can project into very specific roles, Jordan.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, Josh. When you mentioned the spark thing and the athlete thing, and it goes back to what you said about draft and develop with them. They, again, they're really kind of distinctive about like that compared to some other teams. They really almost seem like they want to bring in the biggest, baddest athlete who might not be the best football player, per se, and then just sort of coach them up. And so it's an interesting philosophy. I imagine it can't work all the time, but when it does work, I imagine it works pretty well because they do have a very talented coaching staff there. Some of the things that I also thought was interesting is, they drafted a lot of defensive backs. And, when they were talking about how the defensive backs can, project to the NFL, the thing that they liked to look for is they said they looked for guys who played in the slot in college, but not necessarily did they want him to play in the slot in the NFL. They just thought if a guy played in the slot in college, he's got the foot quickness and the athleticism that he could play on the outside in the NFL. And I thought that was really interesting take on the DB angle. I also thought, again, that goes back to their draft and develop. Like one of the things that Pete Carroll likes to say is learn the learner. He likes to try to dig in and find out how they can, motivate and reach a guy. So it's almost like they have a custom tailored individual learning plan for each guy, and which kind of brings us to their first pick in Malik McDowell.
Yeah. The learn the learner comments in terms of trying to pick each individual guy, how they learn. First of all, my wife, the ex-teacher, would love that because she's very big on finding out and understanding that each kid she works with learns in a different fashion. And in order to optimize their learning experience and get the most out of them, you got to figure out what makes them tick. That's very Parcelsian, if you think about it, in terms of he had a different mental approach to basically every player. Sometimes he was confrontational. Sometimes he would coddle them. He just had a knack for understanding what makes each player tick. And I think we can say the same about Pete Carroll as well. So that's not that particularly surprising with that. With that in mind, Malik McDowell is going to be an interesting one because there's a lot to like about what he is physically and what he can do and his flexibility. And then there's some other stuff that they have to figure out how to get into him. They love his flexibility, can play across the board, basically any position on their line, defensive end, nose tackle, 3-tech, whichever they want, and they love that kind of flexibility. They love his youth. He's only 20 years old, so hopefully not just physically but mentally he can develop as well. One of the things we didn't mention in the general points, but I'll mention here, Jordan, is the fact that he really had a strong sophomore season, and we at PFF, we all thought he was going to really develop and take a much bigger step this past year than he did. And that was something that Carroll and company talked about in terms of if you have good junior, or in this case, sophomore film, that can at times supersede what we've seen from you the last season.
Yeah, we've kind of noticed that, right? Over a couple different teams have sort of mentioned that. Like, they're like, oh, well, we really liked his 2015 tape, instead of his 2016 tape. So it's like it's almost like they're really taking the body of work as a whole rather than just the last couple of games. Yeah,
real quick observation and maybe an open-ended question to discuss later. But that never used to be the way the NFL worked. It used to be a huge red flag if you had big junior film and a poor senior season. The most recent guy that comes to mind to me for that is Jameis Winston, obviously Tampa Bay's quarterback. He had the Heisman year at Florida State, and then he had just a mess of a junior year. There was some off-field issues, and he was ended up suspended for parts of games as well. Just a really interesting case. But people like Steve Palazzolo, our own Steve Palazzolo, went back and looked at the prior year's film, absolutely loved him. And obviously he looks every bit the part of a franchise quarterback. So I don't know that he necessarily precipitated that change, but it's interesting to see that multiple teams are taking that mindset going forward.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. The other thing that was really interesting too, and it goes back to their draft and develop philosophy, is that the Seahawks took a couple guys, including this pick with McDowell, that they thought played inconsistently. And again, they think they can try to get the best out of them. And they mentioned McDowell's inconsistencies on tape. They even said there's a couple of games he'd probably want back. And so that to me was really stood out. I was like, wow, okay, well they just, they're using their first pick on this guy that they're even saying isn't playing with full effort all the time. But that's how much they valued what he could do when he was playing with effort. I mean, they said he was really unique. They view him as a pass rushing 3-technique defensive tackle, which they've been wanting for a while there. So again, there's a lot to like about him. I mean, we were torn internally of whether or not he was an interior player or an edge player, and like I said, with that versatility, they view him as being able to play all over the place, but I think they're going to try to use him as a 3 technique a lot. But yeah, it was really interesting. Again, like you said, just sort of, again, the fact they're willing to overlook a down year, willing to overlook inconsistencies, willing to overlook some freelancing on tape, all because they liked, I guess what some of the things that the kid provided and think that they can reach him. They also frequently mention he's only 20. So I mean, they feel like they have a lot of time to work with him. So they're pretty excited about him. The other player they really think about was very versatile was their next pick in Ethan Posich. Josh, you want to go ahead and talk about that?
Sure. I thought it was interesting that they talked about they're probably going to try him at guard or tackle, knowing that he can play center. That's where he played at LSU. He's 6'6", but still showed the bend, agility, athleticism to play well at center. They're going to try and play him outside, and that makes sense because really the one position that played competently on their offensive line last year at times was Britt inside at center. So it makes sense that they're going to try him elsewhere. And I think it's smart for them to go after a guy like Posich because they have so many needs there. Ultimately, I think he's going to be a guy that's going to pan out in some respect for them. They're going to find a position. It's just a matter of working him around, trying to figure out which one he fits best at.
I mean, you mentioned Britt's play, but also, I mean, like Posich is 6'7", so I mean, like you probably wouldn't want to see him at center with Russell behind him.
Well, that's a good point too. Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously Russell Wilson creates a lot for him outside the pocket. You're not so worried, but still, it's not easy for a sub 6 foot quarterback to be looking over a 6'6", 6'7" center. That's for sure.
I know. So I think that he honestly has a really good chance to fit in at tackle for them. Again, they think that he can play, almost everywhere along the line, but I think he's really got a chance to fill in at tackle there. But they mentioned his conference, that he played great in a great conference. They thought he was smart and tough, and they liked that about him. But again, they viewed him as being so versatile that they said that they thought they were drafting 2.5 players with one guy, because this guy could play like 2.5 positions. So I thought that was really, really, really interesting, the way that they viewed that. And again, how important that versatility was to them. I also thought it was interesting that they tried to really keep that hidden, that they liked him. They wanted to be really careful how much interest they showed. I thought that was interesting. I love the little gamemanship, because some people aren't, shy about it at all, and some teams try to be a little bit more coy about it.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting in particular when you think about the fact that they did what you just said by not letting Tom Cable, the line coach, work him out pre-draft. Now, Tom Cable is one of the most well-known, most respected line coaches in the league, and that's not a guy that typically you would think would just sign off on, I don't need to see him and I'll still take him. So that kind of tells you how much they loved him on film. Now, they weren't the coaches, but certainly they got a little bit of an extra look at him down at the Senior Bowl. That probably helped that process as well, because they got to see how he worked with other coaches a little bit there. That probably helps in that respect. Maybe that's something we need to be keeping an eye on going forward, Jordan, in terms of some of those Senior Bowl guys that don't get worked out by other teams, if they're viewing that as the extra workout, even though it isn't with them individually.
Yeah, like I said, it was just really strange that they didn't even, do that workout. And I guess, again, like Tom Cable's so recognizable that if he went to go work him out at LSU, that would be all over, so Twitter that Cable was there. So, yeah, again, just trying to keep it hidden. So moving on, the next player they took was corner Shaquille Griffin. They view him as an outside corner and special teams guy on the perimeter. Our Sam Monson really, really liked Shaquille Griffin, I know, in the pre-draft process. They view him as again, they like to use confidence, toughness, his quickness and his length, and ability to generate turnovers. Lot to like about that guy. They also drafted Nazir Jones, a big 3-tech that they want to use to load up and play the running game. He can also play 5-tech. And then their next pick was a guy you're a bit more familiar with, Josh, wide receiver Amara Darboh from Michigan.
Yeah, he's the guy. First off, they mentioned he can contribute on special teams. Again, even at wide receiver, which isn't a great core for them, still they want guys that could compete in multiple areas, and I think Darboh will certainly bring that for him, and that was something that they talked about. Shout out to to our good friend. Well, he doesn't know he's our good friend, but we appreciate him. Pro PFT commenter. They talked about Amaro Darboh's grit, how he's overcome a lot in his life, how he's just a real tough kid, and I think that shows off in his film. They liked his route running, his ball skills, his willingness to block. That's certainly on a number of levels very important for their offense. He checks all those boxes off for him. And that's literally what Schneider said. He checks off so many boxes that, again, they tried to lay in the weeds for him. The fact that he also played in the pro-style system at Michigan, that certainly helped him as well. Schneider which one was it? Was it Schneider or Carroll?
No,
one of the two of them. I think it might have been Carroll said at the opening press conference, actually, I think it was, it might have been after day one, but certainly would apply here, obviously, with the Michigan connection here, that he said Harbaugh does a good job, and everyone got a good chuckle out of that. But certainly that's part of the allure of Michigan right now, is the fact that you have an ex-NFL coach, a high-level NFL coach, that's able to develop guys like Amara Darboh, and also one of the later picks that we'll talk about as well, Jordan.
Yeah, just to keep moving on, they drafted David Moore, a small school player, and then they drafted Tedrick Thompson, a player that I know you loved, Josh. He was one of your draft crushes. We loved him. He won our Coverage Defender of the Year award for college football. He's going to play in traditional free safety to start, and then they'll see what happens from there. But he's such a versatile player. You want to talk about him, Josh? I know you love him a little bit more than I do.
Yeah, one of the things I loved about him was his production working man coverage out of the slot. And I think especially when you look at that cornerback core there right now, it's pretty thin, actually. Probably thinner than many people realize. Everyone thinks of Sherman, but beyond him, it's not the best core. So if you have a guy that could play free safety, if Earl gets hurt again, maybe when Earl gets hurt again, he's kind of at that stage in his career. You got Tedrick Thompson back there, can play in the slot as well, so he offers versatility. I think nickel dime packages, you're going to see Thompson on the field as far as that goes. And then a couple of the other defensive backs that they picked up, Jordan. We talked about throughout the draft process how it was such a deep class in terms of corner and safety. Teams that need them, or really any team, should be drafting multiple guys. And Seattle was the best example of that. They took Mike Tyson. He's a guy that's going to play outside press corner, even though, again, he was an inside player in college. That's how they see him projecting out there. And then the other Michigan man that I hinted at, Delano Hill, he played both strong and free safety. They don't question his ability to match up with wide receivers, and I tend to agree. I gave him a big grade. I think we had like a third-round grade on him, so they got really good value out of him. Later on day 3, I believe. They love his physicality, thinks he looks more like a strong. But think back, Jordan, the last couple of years when that defense has had points where they've struggled, it's been because one of those two stud safeties has gone down. And they just drafted 2 guys that I think they're different guys, but they can come in and probably pretty quickly play significant roles. Now, are they Cam Chancellor? Are they Earl Thomas? Obviously not, but at the same time, they really didn't have much backing them up before, and now I think they have viable players ready to step in and take over should Earl Thomas retire in a year or two.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Josh, that, like philosophically, Earl and Cam are basically the heart and soul of the Seahawks, and they basically elevate the play of that team. And so they're definitely going to be hurting when neither one of those guys go. So, as we did mention, we thought double dipping at defensive back was a wise strategy in this draft class, but the Seahawks quadruple dipped. It took 2 corners and 2 safeties, but just kind of set themselves up, for the future. They also picked up Chris Carson and Justin Sr., but then we're just sort of wrap up the Seahawks there. Again, like they're going to look to, next year they're going to look to draft and develop again, and I don't know who, they may be targeting. There was rumors that they may have been targeting a quarterback. I don't know if they want to draft and develop a quarterback behind Russell. I'm not sure. That's entirely possible. They do seem like they're willing to overlook some, maybe performance shortcomings. If they see something they like in a young player's film and they feel like they can reach them. And they really also, and this is something that you come back to all the time, Josh, they really rely on that veteran locker room to keep young guys in line.
Yeah, that's certainly a major issue for them, or I shouldn't say issue, just a key for them, something that they take advantage of. And, it's something that you and I have talked about the last couple days. Teams like Seattle, teams like New England, because they have such a strong core in place, they're able to take gambles on guys like Malik McDowell because they have that leadership in place. Frank Clark, a very good example of an existing player on Seattle's roster, has some major off-field issues coming out of Michigan. But they're able to take those chances because of the other pieces on the roster that they have that A, are going to fill in if they give them issues and they can't get them on the field, or B, are going to just be peers that help keep them in line. So that's something that they know that they can be a little more loose with than some of these other young teams that you're unlikely to see them taking much of any risk with character.
Yeah. All right. So moving on now, we're going to go, I said we do one NFC team and one AFC team. So now we're going to do the Oakland Raiders, the soon-to-be Las Vegas Raiders in 2 years. We'll get to Las Vegas in a minute. So the Oakland Raiders, they're an interesting draft. Again, we said it was a strong draft defensively. They had 6 of their 9 picks were defensive players, which is pretty interesting. Jack Del Rio said they were looking for vastly improved play out of their defense, and hopefully they should get it. I mean, they drafted some really, really good players. They're another team that likes to lay low, like the Seahawks do. They don't really like to let teams know if they're interested in guys. They're not real big on, tipping their hand like that. One thing that I thought was really interesting, Josh, and as far as their draft philosophy and strategy, is that Reggie McKenzie said that he likes to try to collect multiple 7th-round picks. So he said that, he basically, instead of just, having one 7th-round pick and then, going into that undrafted free agent free-for-all, he would rather have, multiple 7th-round picks so he can basically have his pick out of all those guys. So, he said, sometimes I like 3 guys more than I am gung-ho about 1, and that's the case this year. So I thought that was really interesting, kind of a neat strategy, really excited to see how that all plays out for him. And then he mentioned they mentioned Jack Del Rio mentioned the Senior Bowl, and they said that again, all these guys are mentioning the Senior Bowl, just a phenomenal tool. They said that guys that do well there typically do well in the league, and so they like going down there and seeing those players and seeing how they perform. Again, they're trading. They did make some trades in order to get some extra 7th-round picks, and McKenzie won't hesitate to trade up for players they view as impact players, and they think they got an impact player with their first overall pick. Josh, you want to go ahead and talk about that?
Yeah, obviously this one came with a little bit of controversy because of the off-field craziness that happened that week with Gary Conley, the Ohio State cornerback. But speaking to him as a player, capable of playing man or zone, they're going to give him a chance to compete right away when he comes into training camp. They love his range, his length, his speed, his athleticism, his ability to tackle in space. All that played out in film too. We agreed with that. They said they called him a football junkie, just a guy that absolutely loves the game and needs to absorb more and more and more about it. And they love that mentality. They looked at how wide receivers played against him, liked how they struggled to separate from him. He had the ability to play a deep ball, could also play the press, and just again, going back to the comment about him being a football junkie, they just felt like he had a really strong understanding of the game.
Yeah, and they were another one of the teams that did the double dip at defensive back here. And in the next round, they took another one of your favorite players of this draft. I don't know why you like all the safeties, Josh. You can't like all the safeties. But they took Obi Melifonwu from UConn. And as much as Conley basically has a chance to come in and compete and start, I think Obi has a chance to come in and compete and start. Don't you, Josh?
Yeah, I really do. I think he's so much more polished than he's given credit for. I think the fact that he played at UConn, people look at UConn just because it's not a typical football hotbed, as if it's a D2 school sometimes. I really feel that that's kind of the mentality people have with some of those Eastern New England teams. But really, he played everything there. And obviously, he's a gifted athlete. He's ridiculous in terms of an athlete. But they also highlighted the variety of roles he played. Jack Del Rio mentioned that. And really, we saw that. We saw him play free safety. I think that's probably where he's best fit at. But he can play in the box. He's big. He's strong. He's responsible against the run. Makes open field tackles. He can come up and hit. But really, it's just as much about his range, speed, athleticism. Del Rio talked about how it's been no secret that they've really struggled to cover opponents' tight ends. He made that point explicitly, and that he's going to help with that. That was something I think I tweeted out pretty early while watching film on Obi for the first time. I think what I said, Jordan, was if you are an AFC East team, meaning Buffalo, Miami, and the Jets, and you have problems covering Gronk, which everyone does, and you got to face him twice a year if he's on the field and healthy, you really need to think about Obi Melifonwu. Not saying that he's the answer, but at 6'4", 220, with blazing speed and the ability to be as physical and strong in press coverage as that, you need that kind of guy that could potentially match up against a tight end like that. And certainly you look at out west, going against Kelsey, going against the kid in San Diego now,
Henry,
who's going to take on a bigger role. That was something that was talked about today. In I think I just said San Diego. Obviously, I mean LA.
Yeah,
but
we'll get used to that.
That's going to be a big issue. Probably not, but
yeah. So I mean, again, that goes back to what one of the themes that you hit on before the last couple of drafts about drafting to win in your division, and that's what that pick was. Like you said, that's basically to shut down Kelsey and Henry. The next pick they took is Eddie Vanderdoes, interior defensive lineman from UCLA. Dominant player since he got to UCLA, but streaky. So even as a freshman, he was good there. But he can generate an interior pass rush. He's really active, really good with his hands. Again, he can play in multiple positions. Jack Del Rio said that he could play anywhere from a 6 technique end all the way inside to like the 0 technique nose tackle. So he can basically play anywhere along there. But again, they had some of the same concerns that we did, Josh. When he was coming out, we thought, he's really inconsistent and like some of his performance seemed up and down. But man, did he, kick everybody's ass at the Senior Bowl. Like, there's just, which guy are you getting? And they said the same thing. They said, his film is inconsistent. And so Jack Del Rio said, I told them we were looking for the high energy guy, the motivated guy. They even admitted his weight has been up and down. So I really think that if they can get an in shape, motivated Vanderdoes, that he can give them an interior pass rush push and some depth in the interior defensive line, don't you think?
Yeah, I really like this pick. I think the value is extremely appropriate. Third, really, he has some first round tape. I don't think there's any question about that. But then you look at yes, he played well at Senior Bowl, but he comes in sloppy, overweight. That was something they both talked about. And just this film this last year did not match the prior year before his injury. And I wonder if that had something to do with his down year as well, coming off that injury. And that's not something that they necessarily addressed. They talked more about just in general needing to be more motivated, have higher energy. But I think they're potentially getting an absolute stud here. And I think he's going to a really good situation when you think about where that franchise is headed, the depth they have all over the place on both sides of the ball. I think that lends itself to being able to get the most out of those guys, to keeping those guys energized when you're winning like they're going to be winning. I think they're going to be able to get a lot out of him, and he could end up being one of the biggest steals of this draft.
Yeah, again, hopefully if they can get that motivated version, I agree with you.
Right.
Their next pick was David Sharp, a tackle. They said they could play both sides. They again mentioned big. Big was a really common theme with a lot of these picks. They liked his wingspan. They thought he had good feet, coordinated. Here's a great quote from Reggie McKenzie. He said he has the ability to move people and also to stay in front as a pass pro guy. So they liked him in both aspects. But they also agreed he has a lot of refinement to do. And then their next pick was Markel Lee. And you thought this was funny, Josh, but they called him a big middle linebacker. And when I told you that, you got a chuckle out of it.
Yeah, I thought it's interesting. Because what did he measure at? 6'3", 240?
I think something like that.
Yeah, and it wasn't very long ago where anything under 250, 255 was considered tiny at the position. But he's 6'3", 240, and that's now big for a middle linebacker. So that tells you a little bit about how the game has changed with that. I also thought it was interesting that they looked at him again as a big middle linebacker, but as really more of a run stopper, because one of the biggest issues they had was the coverage ability of their linebackers last year. Smith, no longer there, had major issues, and I think that goes back to their second-round pick, Obi Melifonwu. They're going to look at him again to kind of fill that coverage role as a linebacker a little bit as well, in addition to his safety responsibilities. This is just my projection in my head. And Markel Lee, they hope he turns into more of that run-stopping linebacker, which they need as well. Probably not quite as much as the coverage backers. So the fact that they found a way to get both with two different guys, I think that's an interesting approach. And they might even be able to get that a little bit out of the safety they took from your neck of the woods, or at least from the Pac-12, Shalom Luani.
Yeah, they triple dipped. They triple dipped at DB. So they got Luani, a safety, soccer player basically from American Samoa, very good athlete, very good foot athlete, so very well coordinated, playmaker. They like he's aware, studies the game, very physical. I mean, he'll hit you and kind of set the tone type of guy. They have ball skills. They also like that he played strong safety, some free safety rover, so they could move him around. And then, as Reggie McKenzie said, as they say down south, he's a football playing Jesse, which I don't really know what that means, and I don't think Reggie even actually knew what it meant. But you say that Shalom is a heck of a football player, and he's just a football player through and through. And I agree. I really like that pick. I think he could make an impact for them at least early on special teams, and then maybe on the defense a little bit later. Next, they also took Jalen Ware, again, a tackle. They said big, great size. Elijah Hood, a running back. They said big. So it's, again, big is a theme with them. They really wanted some size there. And then, that sort of takes us, that's the end of our 2017 portion of this show, Josh. And then why don't you take us, Josh, back to a different draft with a draft memory?
Yes. Last week you talked about your silly little board games as a kid.
What?
We're not going to go back quite as far. We're going to go back to the prior decade, 11 years ago to be precise, 2006. When people think about the Matt Millen era in the NFL draft for Detroit, everyone thinks about all the first-round busts, in particular, taking 3 different wide receivers, and that's certainly a huge part of it. But how about the fact that he showed incompetence across the board as to how they structured their board and how they made their other picks? This is a story that was relayed to me 2-3 years after this happened. Again, we're talking back to the 2006 draft, and was also verified by the late Tom Kowalski, one of the great beat writers in the league before he passed due to a heart attack, a beat writer for Detroit. He heard this story as well. But this is just a fascinating look into the Matt Millen war room and how dysfunctional it was inside as a result of the way he managed or completely mismanaged it. So third round's coming up in 2006, and there is actually an argument in the war room about which of the 2 offensive linemen on the board they want to take. I don't know who those 2 offensive linemen were.
Now, time out, Josh. There shouldn't be arguments in the war room about who you're going to take on draft day, right? I mean, that should already be taken care of.
It should be taken care of across the board, but certainly at the same position. You shouldn't have a question on a single position as to which guy you prefer. But anyway, so they're arguing between these two, and someone out of the back of the room, no one knows who, and it wasn't the running back coach. I know I can verify that from the person I talked to. It wasn't the running back coach. Said, let's take Brian Calhoun, the little midget running back out of Wisconsin. And Millen, who's fed up with this argument that they're having, throws up his hands and says, fine, we'll take Brian Calhoun. Well, Calhoun was a guy that should have been a 6th, 7th round pick. Again, he's undersized. He had some speed, but didn't really have much of a defined role to carve out at the next level, despite his big numbers his senior year at Wisconsin. And he had maybe all of 500 career yards in his 3-year career. And he just didn't last long for them. But that's just a shocking example. That's the 3rd round, Jordan. That's still, when you're looking to get guys that can contribute right away, that can make plays for you. And I mean, we just talked about Eddie Vander Does, how he's a potential 1st round pick. So you're potentially turning down guys that you could have 1st round grades on in the 3rd round, or a guy that's a 6th round pick in this crazy scenario.
I don't get it. I mean, I know you're too close. It's too personal for you growing up a Lions fan. But so Millen, I mean, we know outside of the GM role, he's a pretty bright football mind. I mean, he does well at broadcasting and other things. It's I don't understand why was he just comically bad as a GM when he's clearly a bright guy in other aspects of football? I mean, what do you think? What do you attribute that to?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a full answer to that. I think part of it might have been that he was never willing to live and work in Detroit full time. He was constantly flying back to Pennsylvania. I just don't think he ever fully committed to it the way he needed to. It'll be interesting to watch how John Lynch does in San Francisco, because obviously similar background, outstanding NFL career. What then went into broadcasting, did that for a few years, built up a reputation through that, and then without any other kind of management experience, jumped straight into the NFL. So I'll be interested to watch him. We talked a little bit about, I think it was last week, we talked about San Francisco. Was it last week? How he kind of took over the defensive aspect of the draft and let Shanahan take over the offense. I don't know that Millen ever had any kind of plan in place like that, so that at least that on the surface appears to be a good start. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully it pans out for him in San Francisco better than it did for Detroit and Matt Millen.
Yeah. That's crazy stuff. I mean, honestly, the one memory that I have the most out of the Millen era is those denim overalls. That's really all. It's really all I can think about is those denim overalls, which I'm going to bring back. By the way, I decided I'm bringing those back. Speaking of back, so now, Josh, we're going to go back in time to the draft time machine, Josh. The draft time machine. We are going to go to the year 2009. Josh, will you please briefly explain to the people, if they didn't listen to the first 2 weeks, what the draft time machine is?
Sure. Draft time machine. We are going to take a look back at a historical draft pick or two, and imagine how the landscape of things for that player, his team, the rest of the league would be different if they went elsewhere. This week, we're going to take a look back at the first 3 picks of the Oakland Raiders. Al Davis was certainly large and in charge at this point in time. In fact, this is the first draft that I attended in person, so it was a rather exciting draft for me. And right off the top of the bat, in the first round, in the top 10, Jordan, we had a very predictable pick from Al Davis in terms of we had a couple of wide receivers. One that everyone thought was a huge stretch, but had that speed that Al Davis loves, and one that didn't get to work out, but had all the pedigree, all the production, looked like he was going to be a fantastic player. And Al Davis went for the speedy, sexy toy, didn't he, Jordan?
Yeah, he went for the Darius Hayward base. So what are you going to do then, Josh? You're gonna pass up DHB. Who are you going to take there in the first round of 2009 then?
I am. I'm going to take the receiver that they should have taken, who again didn't work out, so we didn't know what kind of speed he did or didn't have. I think many speculated he wasn't going to run that fast, and I think that's generally widely accepted. And I think based on how he's what kind of receiver he's become at the NFL level, that's true. But at the same time, he's been a highly productive NFL player in the couple of places he's been, and that's Michael Crabtree, who is out of Texas Tech. I just think that would have been such a much more stable pick than trying to hit the home run with Darius Hayward Bay, who had the low 4.3 speed, but really didn't show many of the wide receiver skills, in particular, hands. That was a bit of an issue for him. Always coming out of Maryland. Certainly throughout his NFL career, that's been an issue. Now he's long since been just a special teamer and long been out of Oakland as well. But Crabtree in San Francisco and now coincidentally in Oakland now has just been a really solid player. And I think with a young quarterback they were trying to develop at that time, he would have been such a better option for them.
So wow. So no DHB and you went Crabtree instead. So you basically cut the 49ers out of the deal altogether. So no middleman there now. Yeah. Okay. I'll tell you what, Josh, that would be a sound pick, but looking at the board, I don't think that's the one I would make. I mean, I know.
Where are you going?
I know Crab's got value, and I like Crab, but I'm going to go with Malcolm Jenkins. I think that'd be a great versatile defensive back to put back there. You can never have enough of good defensive backs, so I think I would go Malcolm Jenkins instead of Crabtree there. Moving on to the second round when the Raiders took Michael Mitchell. Josh, you're gonna change that pick as well?
Yeah, I'm going to change that one as well. They had issues throughout their offensive line. And you can go to every single position at that time. It was an absolute mess. We talked about how bad Detroit was in the Millen era. Well, Detroit only picked first overall once in that time span, and it was actually the year after Millen was finally fired when they took Matt Stafford. And Oakland was one of the reasons for that because they were just as bad. And so I'm going to take center Max Unger out of Oregon. Maybe he plays center for them. Maybe they try him at guard. Obviously, he's had a stellar NFL career. Wherever he's been as center, he's been an excellent player, and he went just a couple picks after where they took Michael Mitchell. I think that would have been a really strong pick for them, Jordan.
Yeah, Unger's been great for two teams. You know what I mean? Like, he's been a quality player, can play multiple positions. Looking at the board, if you don't go Michael Mitchell there and you change that pickup, hard to argue with Max Unger there, Josh. I think I would go the same way. You're not gonna keep going, are you, Josh? Are you gonna go to the third round?
I think we need to go to the third round.
You're gonna go to the third round? They took Matt Shaughnessy. You're gonna get rid of the Matt Shaughnessy pick too?
Well, here's the deal. We talked about third round picks can be really solid players. They can be starters. That should still be viewed in the starter range. And Matt Shaughnessy, while he ended up carving out a decent career as a backup, he was never going to be a starter. Ultimately, he put up big numbers at his combine, but you watch the film and he didn't show that same level of athleticism that he showed at the combine. Certainly didn't have the kind of flexibility that he appeared to show at the combine. I thought he was a bit of a stiff, robotic edge player coming out of Wisconsin. You took Malcolm Jenkins with your first pick. I'm going to address the secondary with this one. I'm taking Ladarius Webb, who turned out to, when healthy, especially early in his career, was a pretty solid corner, won a Super Bowl with Baltimore, and obviously he's still there. He's transitioning to safety. Again, they had holes everywhere, so whether they had immediately put him at safety or put him at corner as Baltimore did until recent, I think they would have gotten excellent production out of him there.
Yeah, I mean, I think they definitely would have got some better production out of him than they ended up getting out of Shaughnessy. That's a really good pick there, Josh. But if for me, again, since I took a DB in the first round, I'm not going to take Ladarius Webb here in the third. I would take Mike Wallace instead. Add that speed element, wide receiver. Hopefully he could be consistent out there on the outside. I don't have DHB, don't have Crabtree, but I got a Mike Wallace, running the 9 down the sideline, and hopefully, he can get some stuff done. But yeah, that's where I would go instead of Shaughnessy.
I like that pick. Obviously, had a bit of an interesting career. Hasn't had much success outside of Pittsburgh, outside of running that 9. But at the same time, I think he would have offered more with that, than certainly would have been better value being able to do that with Oakland than what DHB was or wasn't doing at all for them. So I think that one makes a lot of sense as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting scenario. YOLO, Josh letting us go through 3 rounds. You're nuts, man. All right, well, I think
it's also fair to say real quick to wrap up that segment that hindsight's 2020.
Oh yeah,
obviously, and there's a little bit with that, and obviously we picked out guys that have panned out, but at the same time, I know that these were guys that much of the league and much of the draft community thought very, very highly of. Malcolm Jenkins was pretty universally one of the top defensive backs. Max Unger was number 2 center behind Alex Mack. And a lot of people like the Ladarius Webb, Mike Wallace too. So it's not like these guys we just pulled out of thin air just because they've had productive careers. Those were guys that were highly thought of at that time.
No, I agree. And hindsight is 2020, Josh, which is why I invented a time machine. All right, so now back to the present. That's going to wrap up this episode of Drafts with Jordan and Josh. Please go to profootballfocus.com/subscriptions, where you can find out about our new products, PFF Edge, which unlocks all premium articles across fantasy, DFS, NFL draft. We got PFF player grades, including snap counts, blocking, and career grades. We got our baby NFL draft pass, in-season analysis, position rankings, and signature stats. And then Jeff Ratcliffe's really awesome weekly wide receiver and cornerback matchup charts, O-line fantasy stats, handcuff index, shadow cover matrix, and more. And Josh, you got a PFF Elite?
Got to get the PFF Elite again. Go to profootballfocus.com/subscriptions. Go into iTunes. Leave us that 5-star feedback. Get entered into the contest. Win that $200 Elite package so that you can win your fantasy league. So you can get all the information, all things football, college, NFL, draft, fantasy. Get it all done.
Yeah, and try to stay up with Greg Noonan because he's going to dominate.
Yes, he is.
We love you, Greg. See you guys next week.